I've spent a bit of time getting this as close as I can. The profile's not perfect. It's close enough. I'm going to have to do something with this trailing edge because that isn't quite right for the arch. It's very close. I've also chopped off the bottom piece where it meets the sill, partly because I needed to, because I needed it that short, but also because there was a repair there, which I didn't know until I hit the filler. So that all had to come off. But it looks like this arch butts up very, very closely to the line I cut, which was the point where the good metal begins. So it looks like I've landed on my feet a bit with that one. I'm going to tack this in place just to hold it a bit better than that little bit of tape there, and then I'm going to offer up the outer arch and just see if everything lines up. If it lines up pretty well, I can then stitch weld this in. If not, I'll pop through the tack welds and we'll move it around until it's where I need it to be. Tacking the inner arch went in okay. This isn't going to be a tidy repair. I'm having troubles getting in this arch to see what I'm doing. I don't want to remove the whole suspension. I was happy with the location of the inner arch, so I offered up the outer. The fit is reasonable. It's not perfect. I am going to have to do some work, especially this end. There's all kinds of weirdness going on. This end's pretty good, and the inner arch is going to need to be pulled out this way a little bit just to meet up, but I can't really do that until everything's secure, so there's certainly some fiddling about. The green paint I'm just using as a rough guide for where the arch sits. That way I can take this off and it's just a bit quicker for me to align everything when I put everything back together. So I'm going to pop the outer arch off. I'm going to stitch the inner one in as much as is needed. I'm not seam welding it. It's not really necessary. This is what my welding looks like on the outside of the car, where I've got reasonable access. The only annoying thing I'm having is the auto dim function on the mask here. It's going a bit nuts when the sun comes out or when it catches reflections off anything chrome, so that's been a bit frustrating. Other than that, this piece has gone quite nicely. A bit of flat wheel action and that will be fine. And you can see this is the new inner arch that I've put in. There's decent penetration. Now the weld line isn't one single line in here, it does move around, which is why you're not seeing it through in every place. But where I've welded, the penetration is good. However, this is not how I want to weld this. This is how I have to weld this, because the scorch marks is from the weld through primer, and it's just ugly. It's just pigeon poo welding, but unfortunately that's what I'm going to have to do. The trouble is, without taking this off and the trailing arm and that, I physically can't get my head in here when I've got the mask on to see what I'm doing. So it's proving to be unpleasant. But I can say that enough of the inner arch is done now that the bits, that's just dirt there, the bits like in the corner here and the missing piece here, which I'll rebuild once I've got everything together, because then I'll have my reference points. This has gone okay. You know, I'm going to seam seal this all in one go when everything's finished. And I'll knock back as many of the welds as I can. The biggest problem in here is access. It's very poor. Well, I'm glad I didn't record doing that. That ended up being a bit of a chore. I was trying to figure out why the inner and the outer weren't matching up. And I'd had a brain fart, because the inner is a driver's side front and the outer is a passenger side front. And those two profiles are ever so slightly different, and it's not much. So what I should have been using is a passenger side front wing for the outside arch to match the inside arch. Never mind, I've got it close enough. I'm pretty sure at some point in the future I will have to revisit this when I find the correct panel, so we're just doing our best with what we've got for now. I've reused the original bit of repair work here because the metal was still reasonable condition and it was a nice clean cut. It's already shaped. It needs a little bit of reprofiling just up here, but I can do that once this section's on. to make the arch profiles match, I've had to just cut a slit out here, so I will have to put a small piece in. Again, I'll do that when I've done the rest of it. I accidentally cut too much metal out here, which is super, but I did keep the piece, so I'll just weld back in what I took out. Yeah, this job has not gone brilliantly, and I have a very complicated piece to make down here because the piece I cut out is mostly filler, so I'm going to have to take my time on that one. So I'm going to tack this all in and just get it stabilised, and I think that's going to be me done for today, being wrapped up in all this safety gear. I'm just about done with that. I've got my hours in. This trusty old thing has proven its worth once again. There's not much to go. I definitely got too much heat in this panel, so it definitely warped it a bit, but as I've said before, I'm probably going to have to revisit this in the future, so it doesn't matter. Got to make a small wedge there. Got to grind all of these various welds down. This is one of those awkward bits where it's just a bit too small for a patch and really just a bit too large for bridging, so I might have to do a combination of the two. We'll see. I do have some rods somewhere that might do it, but I don't know. Then I've got this area to rebuild. The arch profile on the wing, this is as much as you get, and unfortunately this is as far as the rust had gone, so I will have to make a patch there. Of course I've got to rebuild this piece, and on the inside I have to do a little patch here, which is slightly irritating, and then I'll have to rebuild this corner, which I think I can do with bits of the wing that I haven't used yet. There's just a tiny gap here, so I'm probably going to have to put a patch in there. I'm not sure how I missed that one, but I did. And you can see that I need to just trim the inner and the outer just so they line up. This is just one of those things where, because I'm using what I'm using, nothing is really supposed to go together this way. I'm just making it. I will probably drill and spot weld through this lip just to hold these two together before I seal it all up. I think that will probably be a good idea. And I've learned some important lessons for the other side, which is namely, cut higher up if you can, because it would make doing all this inner arch a lot easier. I could have done it from the outside then, which is how I wish I'd done it now, but you learn as you go. Actually, one last thing, just before I pack up today. I just threw some zinc primer on it. It simultaneously makes the whole thing look better and worse, because it gives you very sharp shadows. But yeah, once this has had the flat wheel over it, I think it'll be okay. Profile's not terrible. Good enough for this car. Applied a bit of grinder magic, and now that pretty unsightly looking weld is no more. I filled this piece in here. That went quite well. I obviously got this too hot in some places. You can see there I was having trouble with the panels blowing through yesterday, so that's what that's about. Yeah. A couple of little pinholes to catch, and I've just been doing this awkward bit here where it's just a little bit too small to put a patch in and really just a little bit too big to do weld. So just been steadily building that up, trying to keep the heat down, and I've now got this awkward bit to do. The trouble is, this is what's come out, and I can't realistically reuse this. There's a couple of different layers and filler and rust, so I've got to remake this piece, which slots in there, but it's an awkward concave shape, and I know I don't have any tools that could get in this corner here, so I've sort of got to make this out of one piece. What I'm probably going to do is make this top section with the hammer and just stretch some metal out, and then weld a bottom piece on here, because that's a simple bend, and just get it as close as I can. An awkward one, that. Once I've got that on, I can then deal with the bottom edge of this. I've left this a bit long and the profile's not quite right because obviously it's not the right panel for this area. So I've got to bridge this gap, do this patch, and then deal with whatever goes on with this corner. Which is probably going to take me the rest of the day. Things like this always do. Almost finished. I've got all the rough welding in now. I've got all of this area is rebuilt, just got the bit from the arch to the bottom of the sill to put in and that little tiny patch. Pop the wheel on just so you can see the profile is pretty much as it should be. It's not going to be a problem or jump out as being particularly wrong unless you really know what you're looking at. Yeah, just waiting on batteries charging, so I'm going to break for lunch and we'll come back, we'll finish off this bit here. We'll get the magic grinder on to make the welds actually look better than they normally do. My welding isn't the prettiest, never has been, but it's functional and it does the job, and I haven't had problems with things falling apart, so it'll be fine. Good enough is good enough, it doesn't need to be perfect. Make ugly welds a thing of the past with industrial quantities of seam sealer. Eventually I would like to replace all of the inner arch where the seam is there, so like the outside half of the inner arch, with a completely fresh panel. So if I ever get that opportunity, I will do that. What I have learned doing this repair is it would be better on the outside to basically chop away all the way up to here sort of area, which is where your outer repair panels go to, so you can weld all of the damage on the inner arch from the outside, which would be a lot easier and get a much nicer job. As you can see, I have hit everything with some zinc primer. I really like the rust inhibiting properties of it. I find it doesn't bother other paints I use, so I tend to use that before I put any primers on at all, and I generally get less problems with rust. I've also given it a quick dust of black just so I can see where my high and low spots are a little bit easier. The sunlight does overexpose everything a little bit. It actually grinded down very, very well. A lot of the welds, a lot of the very ugly welds, have actually just disappeared. As is normal with my welding, when you're butt welding bodywork, and I'm using 0.6mm wire for this job, it's almost impossible to get a nice clean weld without blowing through. So you have to go dot 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 and then join up, and you end up with this sort of squiggly weld no matter what you do. And with it being such a large area, it's much more visible. So that was one of my problems with that. Also, I'm not a professional welder, I'm a hobbyist. This corner turned out okay. I didn't have to rebuild the sill patch as I feared. There was a little bit of sort of undersealy stuff on there, and that's what was causing my problems. Once that was cleaned away, it was fine. I know the profile's wrong there. I know Maestro profiles aren't like that, but I'm making do with what I've got. And you can see on the inside, you know, it's cleaned up okay. I ended up making it with one patch here to get this curve in. What I couldn't figure out was how to get that curve and follow it down onto the sill in one piece. I'm very limited on my forming tools. So what I did find was a piece of arch I'd cut off was actually close enough profile here that I could sort of fudge it, and then a bit of filler will hide all of this unevenness. I know it doesn't look great, does it? But some filler and it will be fine. And as I've said before, eventually I'll come back and redo this, but I've got to get this done before it's MOT, so strong is more important than pretty. I mean, as it stands now, technically it could go for an MOT and it will probably pass because there's no rust, there's no holes, everything is solid. But I'm going to spend a little bit extra time and I'm just going to finish this off properly. Don't forget, before you start any welding, disconnect your battery. I always just disconnect the positive This is future me here telling you this, because I forgot to put it in the welding. Just means that everything electrical on the car is kept safe, and then just remember to connect it again when you've done. That way you won't wonder why your car's not starting. I've now completely tidied up the inside. Splashed a bit of red paint in there. That's Volkswagen Mars Red, which just happened to be a red I'd got. Since I am going to be undersealing in here, it doesn't really matter what colour it is, I just wanted it to be a red. I've got everything primed and with just a rough guide coat on there, just so I can see the high and low spots a bit easier. The zinc primer is quite reflective, so it can be a bit hard to see. So I'm going to rinse everything off, get rid of all the dirt and contaminants that are definitely on here, and then we're going to filler this and get some top coat on. Nothing too crazy, we're not going to try and get a factory finish, just tidy. That'll be enough for doing the filler work. I'll dry all that off before I put the filler on, just to get all the loose contaminants off, all that sort of grinder dust and whatnot. Filler time. Follow the instructions on your packet. Don't use too much hardener. Remember to use your hardener. Also, don't make a massive batch because you only have so much work time. So don't try and make enough to do the whole arch in one go. Because you'll just have a bad time. A little too much hardener in there. That's better. So you want your filler when you mix it to not be too pink. So, you know, this is like, I don't know what you describe the colour as, but yeah, if your filler's looking very, very pink, you've used too much hardener and it's going to go off really fast. It's going to be very difficult to sand. So you want to avoid that if possible. Yeah. So once you're happy it's all mixed, you can then start applying it to the car. You want to be fairly smooth. Don't overwork it, you can always sand it back later. And whatever you're putting on, try and keep close to the profile you want rather than overfilling. You can always add more filler if you need to. Actually, sanding it back is a bit of a chore, so anything you can do to avoid that is great. Very hot today, so this is going to go off very quickly. I'm just using a fairly standard flexible steel scraper for this. You can use plastic ones. I find these are a little bit easier for me to control, so that's why I use them. Most of this filler will be sanded off. That's our first batch. So this is how your first fill generally looks. You're not aiming for perfection, you're just sort of roughing the shape in to get it close to the profile you finally want. A lot of this you'll sand straight off as well. The sanding block will help even everything out, and then you can go back and do a second, sometimes a third and fourth fill. Depends how picky you're being. The key really is to use as little as possible while getting the profile that you want. So I know in this section here I've used a bit more than I'd normally be comfortable with, but it's significantly less than I took out of the car, so that will be fine. Whereas up on here, I know this area here, just from filling it, a lot of that's just going to go away. There'll be barely anything in there. And that's really what you aim for. This is just to fill in the little undulations and imperfections that are caused when you do the welding. And it just gives you a slightly nicer finish, makes the repair less visible. So we'll let this cure and I'll come back and sand it. First round of sanding done. I hosed everything off just to clean the dust away as much as I could. And I've just put the second fill on after getting everything nicely dried out on the car. There's very, very little. And this is the key thing with your second fill. You're just catching up little areas where you've missed, where you've had little low spots. And it shouldn't be very much. Sometimes you'll get a stubborn profile, especially when you're looking for a very perfect paint job or you're working with something like black. This red's incredibly forgiving, so I'm not worried about perfection here. The biggest amount of fill I've had to do on this second round is this corner. It's a very complicated shape, and I wouldn't be surprised if I have to do a third fill here just to get it how I want it to look. But it's close enough for now. So I'm going to let this cure, and I'll come back in a little bit and we'll sand it all off again. In fact, we'll probably end up sanding about 80% of this off. That's one of the other things with filling. And we'll see if we need a third go. Hopefully not. You never know. Second fill all sanded down, and the profile is very, very close to being exact now. It's close enough for me to do the next bit. I would like to spend a bit more time on this area because this isn't quite as I'd like it, but I'm running out of time today and I need to get paint on this. So I'm going to revisit this later. For now, I'm going to get paint on everything that's bare metal to protect everything. I don't want it rusting. I don't want this filler gathering moisture. If you can work under cover, or if you know the weather's going to be good, then you would spend a lot more time. I'd do another couple of passes with the filler, make everything perfect. But the weather's a bit changeable lately, and I think I'm going to be revisiting this in the future anyway when I can get some better panels to do this repair. So I'm not going to make this completely perfect. I'm going to make this as near as it needs to be. It should blend in with the rest of the car then, actually. If I make this arch look too nice, it's going to look obviously replaced. We are in get it done territory with this. Although I will say, bin bags are great for masking up small wheels on cars. Now then, one little tip I was given a while ago. I'm sorry, I can't remember who it was. If it was you, thank you. When you mask up and you don't want a hard line, which I don't on this, put your tape on just above where you want it, put your paper underneath, and then fold it up, but don't press this down. And then when you spray, it sort of blends rather than making a very hard line. Very useful tip. I'm just using Halford stuff. It's not the cheapest out there, but it's the easiest to get hold of. I'm using a white primer on this because the red on the Maestro has a white primer underneath. Makes the red a bit brighter. So hopefully the red I'm using, which isn't Targa red because Halfords don't stock that, will just be a little bit brighter and blend just a tiny bit better. You'll still see the difference, but this car's already 4 different shades of red anyway, so it won't matter that much. The primer does show where you need to do a bit more work on this, which is one of the advantages of actually using some primer. So you can see here, I've not quite got the profile right. It's close. It'll be fine when it's got the colour on, but that'll be one of the little bits I go back and redo. This edge down here is perhaps a little sharp, so maybe just a little bit of blending there. And of course, this section, actually this isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. It still needs a bit of work just to blend all the curves, but mostly that looks okay, so I'm happy with that. And I know when the colour coat goes on, a lot of these sins will disappear anyway. So we'll just let this do its thing and dry off, and then we'll get the red on there. It's not as bad as it could be. It looks better than it did. That's what matters to me. And like I say, I'm going to be coming back and doing a little bit more work on this, just to smooth out the very obvious issues. I'm just going to let this dry off a bit, and then we'll put some lacquer on just to keep it safe. That also means if I happen to spill petrol down the side of it, it won't take all the paint off. Colour match isn't terrible, and it will darken a bit as it dries. Moment of truth, let's take the masking off. That's not bad. Not bad at all. Certainly good enough.